يكون معكم.
دكتور سويد أهلا وسهلا فيك.
ألبير أهلا وسهلا فيكم. I know you from a distance. I didn't have the pleasure to meet either of you هيك one on one, but it's a pleasure to have you both with us. Thank you for participating in our webinar. وطارق يعطيك العافية مثل العادة.
Thank you.
And we have got with us the soldiers behind the scenes, Zena Abu Zuluf and Maria Al-Haj. They are the ones who really do all the work behind the scenes. We should not forget them. And all my colleagues بالcommittee. Ken Hassan Kishli was on standby. I had, unfortunately, I had a commitment اللي ما قدرت أطلع منها آخر لحظة, but I just got myself out of it to be with you. So Hassan was on standby. Well, thank you, Hassan, for being there. إحنا فينا نبلش whenever you want, طارق.
إيه okay, it's fine. يلا. عم بزيد العدد مع الدقايق. So أنا قلت نعطيهم شي دقيقة.
كيف في طريقة طارق نشوف أنا وأنت وألبير نكون على نفس السكرين بما إنه هيدا البانل؟
هلا أنا عامل لك سبوت لايت والباقي كله مفروض هلا نطلب من البارتيسبنتس معنا إنه يطفوا الفيديوز تبعولهم بليز. بس أنا I'm spotlighting you. لما تحكي مفروض لحاله بيروح لعندك
لا بس أنا إنه نكون أنت أكتف, تكون أنا وأنت وألبير على نفس السكرين عندي.
خلينا نجرب. فوق على اليمين في عندك شيء اسمه جاليري فيو.
هون
فيك تحط سبيكر فيو. سو الثلاثه اللي المفروض نطلع نحن على يمينك شفتنا. اذا حطيت سبيكر فيو انت على الموبايل ولا على اللابتوب؟ في حدا عم بيعمل لك ميوت فور سم ريزن. ايه على الموبايل ولا على اللابتوب؟
انا على الموبايل.
في ايميل معوض عم بقول it doesn't work three together in the same time. So هاي limitations تبع التكنولوجي basically.
No problem.
يلا I think we can start.
Let's start. يلا.
Okay. تفضل دكتور.
Good afternoon, everybody. It gives me great pleasure on behalf of the committee of the International School of Soueid alumni to introduce our colleague on the committee, Mr. Tarek Zebian, who will be hosting this webinar. Tarek is the Director of Research and Communication in the Capital Markets Authority, and prior to that, he was Director of Research and Communications as the Capital Markets Authority in March 2014. He worked in Bank de Lebanon as the Payment Systems Department and with the Financial Assets and Real Estate Department and as a research analyst with Barclays Capital in London. Mr. Zebian holds an MSc from the London School of Economics and Political Science and a BA in Business Administration from the American University of Beirut. He is an awardee of the Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Order of Merit in 2008. And he is the current president of the London School of Economics alumni in Lebanon. And I must say that Tarek is very active with regards to his alumni, and he himself has hosted many seminars which I have personally attended. And Tarek has graduated from International School of Soueid in 2001. It's an honor to have him on the committee. And we thank you very much for hosting and putting together this webinar. This is actually the second webinar that is done by International School of Soueid alumni committee, and we look forward to many more alumni, and the future alumni will be in participation with the other schools in Lebanon, which are International School of Soueid, Kura, and SABIS Adma. So, no further ado, please Tarek, take over.
Thank you, Dr. Tafir. Thank you. It's my pleasure to be hosting this webinar on behalf of the IIC alumni with two distinguished gentlemen and friends who are laboring day in and day out for a better Lebanon. Dr. Mazen Soueid is the chairman and general manager of IDAL, the Investment Development Authority of Lebanon. Previously, he was the economic advisor to the Lebanese Prime Minister and president of the Productive Sectors Committee of the Economic Social Council. Dr. Soueid was chief economist at BankMed and holds a PhD in economics from Brown University. Also with us today is Mr. Kostanian, host of LBC's Vision 2030, a leading political show in Lebanon. Albert is the head of Levant at Arthur D. Little, a strategy and management consulting firm, and fellow at Issam Faris Institute at AUB. Albert is a graduate of HEC School of Management in Paris. Before we start, I should mention as a disclaimer that I do not claim to have Albert's skills in hosting guests, but I will do my best today to convey the complexity of the situation that Lebanon faces, and as such, to better assess what Lebanon will look like in 2030, which is the topic of our talk. The crisis that we live today will carry heavy implications on our social fabric as a nation. It will affect our economic decisions as individuals, and most importantly, it will define the future of upcoming generations and the country they live in. The crisis carries with it a possible intervention from the IMF. As many of us believe it is the only resort for Lebanon, others think we are walking into a dragon's den. If this is not enough, the Lebanese crisis comes at a point in history where humanity is facing a global pandemic with heavy economic and political consequences. For instance, major economies are printing money excessively, and central banks are carrying heavy losses on a global scale. Companies worldwide are re-evaluating the workforce from new perspectives. Big conglomerates are downsizing their staff numbers, and global unemployment rates are soaring. Politically, questions have emerged that are shaping the narrative in many developing countries. Many are wondering if the current economic and political structure of the European Union will survive the crisis, for example. Global trade wars continue, and a blame game on the origins of the coronavirus affects global security. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, a new reality is shaping. The epicenter of religious conflicts and political volcanoes is witnessing yet another development in its central cause. This has culminated in the end of the two-state solution and Oslo Accords between Palestinians and Israelis. Syria, our main exporting hub, is still in turmoil, and the GCC countries are phasing in plans to build sustainable economies less dependent on oil. If this tells us something, it is that the world around us is changing. This so-called international safety net that protects Lebanon no longer exists. And this means one thing only: it is time for Lebanon to change as well. And here I will begin with the first question to our guest, Mr. Albert. And to build on what we discussed before, do you think that 2030 is a new beginning for Lebanon? Have we learned the lessons of the past, or will we fail again to build a nation worthy of its citizens?
Thank you, Tarek, for the introduction. I'm honored to be among you. Maybe I will reply to your question. If I understood well, we could have a 4 or 5 minute intervention around this question, and then we will cater for a Q&A with the audience. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, yes. Our audience are free to send in messages through the chat box, and we will ask you the questions on their behalf.
Okay, so yes, I believe that definitely it's not 2030. I believe that 2020 is the new beginning. And I always refer in my chats to the term crisis. So I said that many times before TV or in interviews. So you might have heard that, but it's always good to repeat it. To say that what is the etymology of the term crisis? So crisis comes from ancient Greek, krisis, and it's a positive term. It's not a negative term. It refers to renewal, to reinvention, and the crisis in the modern definition of the term is when you pass from an old status to a new status. So I believe that the crisis is, of course, when you live it day to day, is very negative, but philosophically, it has a very positive meaning, because it means that things can reinvent themselves and that you can shape your future, and the future is not linear, which would be catastrophic, because it can change, can reshape, and some new events could change the future. So I believe that this crisis is very positive for Lebanon, because the old model was completely unsustainable. So it's been decades that we are living in a model that was due to collapse sooner or later. And I always wondered how economists and media and stakeholders in Lebanon weren't so vocal about that, because I believe that any decent economist would have foreseen the collapse, and this was a system based on nothing. So the system collapsed, and I'm happy it collapsed. I wished it has collapsed sooner, because I believe I see the system like a big beast that we fed for years and years. And now that we don't have the means to feed it anymore,
it will starve and die.
It starved and collapsed. So if this collapse happened 10 years ago, I believe the damages would have been less damageful or less impactful on the national economy. Now, what happened. The system, I believe, is now dead. So how to reinvent ourselves? I very want to address the major issues. The first issue is the transition. And I believe the whole transition and the whole debate today in the country is about the distribution of losses. This beast was fed, it collapsed. I believe we are all responsible. And I believe that the distribution of loss is not the exact same debate on who is responsible. Because responsibilities, and you have also affordability. So who can afford to pay the losses? And today we are in the height of that debate. Unfortunately, I believe that the debate is not focused enough, is not rational enough, is not inclusive enough to be able to come out with a good conclusion. The distribution of losses must happen. This is something we are finally acknowledging in Lebanon, because in Lebanon we always have this mythology or those ideas that there is always a magical hand, because we are very, very used in Lebanon to always ask for money for foreign powers. So in Arabic, I will put it as plainly, we are very good at shahade. It's been like 20 years. Yeah, unfortunately, the whole business model of Lebanon built around begging the international community for money. So we had Pari 1, Pari 2, Pari 3, and I believe there is more to come. So this time no one will bail us out, and we must distribute the losses internally. So I believe that the dogmatic approaches that we are hearing are very short-sighted. It's neither the government, nor the banks, nor the wealthy depositors. I believe it should be a mix of everything with a philosophy of responsibility, accountability, and affordability. I will not go into the details. We can maybe expand into that in the Q&A.
Definitely. So I want to move. Yeah, please go ahead.
Sorry, I have just 2 points in this introduction. The second building block, so we have this distribution of loss. The second building block, I believe, is a new political system. So as the economy collapsed and we are witnessing, or we are eager to rebuild a new business model, I believe that our political model is no longer viable. So we must also reflect as Lebanese on how to build a modern political system that will also reflect the balances of power and all the specificities that are present in Lebanon, but it should be a modern, we cannot continue like that, affecting positions to sects and religions and going through this inefficient system. The third one is destroying the myth. We have very entrenched myths in Lebanon that are very solid, that I would love to destroy, and I will cite like 3 or 4 of them. First of all is Lebanon is a service country. So how nice. So we ended up in producing nothing. So in 40 years, we produce nothing because Lebanon is a service country. Another one is Lebanon is an immigration country. So all the graduates that are around this webinar and all the brains that we produce in Lebanon are destined to immigration, which is really a pity. And I believe this is something that is very damageful to the country. The third myth is Lebanon survive only by private sector management, and this is very deep in Lebanese mentality. So I don't care about the street, I don't care about the infrastructure. We have all very nice homes, very nice cars, but no public transportation. This is becoming cultural in Lebanon, and I believe this is demonstrable because no country can live without public goods that create bonds and viabilize the economy. And the last one is about corruption, that corruption is kind of normal, and it's the minimal corruption, والشطارة على Lebanese. So this is also a myth that is very damageful. I could cite many other myths, but I'll stop here.
All right, thank you. I want to give the floor to Dr. Soueid to comment on what you just said. And I want to start with a small question. I mean, building on what Albert just mentioned on distribution of losses, do you think that the current players in the system, do they have the legitimacy to actually do this?
Let me first comment on a couple of things and go back to your original question, Tarek.
Yes,
where will Lebanon be on 2030? Because I think that, as Albert says, a crisis is an opportunity, but a crisis is an opportunity for those who transform it into an opportunity. A crisis is not always a transformation. Let me give you two examples. I was at the IMF in Washington, D.C. as an economist working on emerging market crisis between 1997 and 2004, which was a very lucky period for an economist who just finished his PhD to be at the IMF, because that was a very rich period in emerging market crisis, starting with the collapse of the Asian tiger in 1997, Korea, Thailand, Malaysia. Then you had Russia in 1998, Brazil in 1999, and Argentina in 2001. And let me give you two just things that I remember very vividly from my days at the IMF during these years. When the Asian crisis happened in 1997, everybody wrote articles and basically books about the end of the Asian miracle, you know, the collapse of the tiger, and that how these countries basically were doomed and that they are going to enter back into very long periods of recession and even depression, like Latin countries did in the 80s and 90s when they had their own debt problems and effectively never really recovered. In contrast, when Argentina happened, the crisis in 2001, the default of the Argentinian government and the collapse of the peso, which was back to the dollar, one versus with a perfect peg, and 1 peso equal $1. Everybody thought that, you know, Argentina is a Latin American country. It is they're all genetically Italians. The Europeans will not let them basically collapse. The US has a strategic interest, and then Argentina will recover very fast. Fast forward to 2020, the Asian countries are breaking records in per capita GDP. They are the highest. They are at the front line of technological advancement and of innovation. And they are basically now the economic center of the world. Argentina, which defaulted in 2001, has been in constant default, has been in constant crisis. And the last default happened in 2020, this year, earlier this year. By the way, so that also our friends in government understand, while in an IMF program. Argentina last defaulted while it is in an IMF program. So it is not, a crisis is not always a thing that we have to go through and then things will get better. A crisis is like a sickness that we get, you know. Sometimes it gets worse before it gets better, and sometimes it gets worse and it just stays worse. Stage 3 cancer is not necessarily something that has to get worse before it gets better. If it goes to stage 4, then you have a big problem, all right? So I wish I could share with my fellow panelist Albert his optimism that a crisis will lead us definitely towards a transformation of the economy and of the politics, because I'm not sure that things will be better, especially if I quote a very thing that I like by Einstein, which was you cannot keep using the same tools and expect different results. He defines insanity as such. And unfortunately, the political class, the same political class that drove us here, are now at the helm, and we are expecting us to get us from here.
And this is what I wanted to ask you.
We're hoping that they get us from here, and I never mix my hope with my expectations. So I think we're up for a rough period. I agree with Albert that there is a very big part of this that is political rather than economic. I would go either beyond that and tell you what kind of political system will get us out of this mess that we got ourselves into because of wrong economic policies. A political system that is based on a secular state. There is no way Lebanon can get out of this mess without a country with civic rights, with a secular state, with the end of confessionalism, because you cannot have democracy. You cannot have a confessionalist democracy because it kills accountability. The basics of democracy is that you have ownership and accountability. You own these policies and then you're held accountable to them when the next elections are basically being held. In this country, they have ownership, but they don't have accountability because they can always raise the banner of the sect, of the religion, and basically cover their failure with it by basically pumping anger and fear mongering of one sect to the other. And the last political discourse of the last week is a signal to anyone who still has hope in such a political class that should be now focusing on 2030 and what we should learn from this crisis to take our country to the next level, and how can we do the political reforms to basically work in parallel. Look at the level of the discourse of the country. I mean, just look at the newspaper, and you can imagine that these are the people today that are responsible for getting you out of this. Now, regarding your point on the distribution of losses, also I would like to a bit disagree with Albert that the distribution of losses should happen now. From my days as a banker, and this was my problem with the government plan, that the government plan engaged totally into the question about the distribution of losses. A loss is not a gap. There is a big difference between a loss and a gap. A loss is a gap when the subject being studied is in liquidation proceedings. A loss is not a gap if the subject being studied is a going concern. You are a banker and you understand that when we have a company that is defaulting on its debt, and we are the creditors of this company, the first question we ask, is this company a liquidation issue or a going concern issue? Mm-hmm. If I'm liquidating this company, then yes, I need to distribute the losses and hold people accountable for the losses they made. Also based partly, as Albert said, on affordability. But if this company is a subject of going concern, a financial loss is not a gap that needs to be filled. The question should be, how do I make sure to regain the confidence and basically go back to boosting growth in order to minimize the size of the loss in terms of projected revenue or projected growth in this case. Okay? The government paper treated Lebanon as a liquidation rather than a subject, rather than a going concern.
I agree, but would you say that they treated Lebanon as a liquidation when it came to the central bank and not to the banking sector itself? Because at the end of the day, you have depositors that you need to pay back in some way or another. So you need, you need to do this exercise.
Look, the whole approach was a liquidation issue. And by the way, and I also said this in my comments to the government, I told them, because even it's, in my opinion, it was a poor distribution of losses, because a distribution of losses should be inversely related or positively correlated to the responsibility of these losses. Okay? In Lebanon, who is responsible for these losses? The biggest responsible is the government. And when we're talking about the governments, we're talking about the two sides of the government, the executive branch and the legislative branch, because all spending that happened happened in most of the spending happened in laws that were ratified by the parliament, all right? And the parliament was elected by the people, okay? So basically the parliament, the legislative arm and the executive arm, they are responsible of the losses. The second responsibility, and that's not a far away responsibility, I mean, it is very close, is to the parties that facilitated this inefficient spending, to say the least. I don't want to say more than inefficient spending. You know, I can say more, but I don't want to say more. Inefficient spending, I'm a government employee in the end, although I was only appointed October 10, as they say in Arabic, but,
October 10, 2019, just to let our viewers know.
Exactly. After lots of convincing to come to IDAL, to leave the private sector, I'd come to IDAL. Anyway, this is our destiny, and maybe things happen for a reason. There was a facilitation, and there was basically a capitalization of the profit making on this inefficient spending that happened from the part of the banks and the central banks. This is responsibility number 2. Responsibility number 3 is with the people, the depositors, who either by greed or by lack of financial knowledge believe that a 10% at the bank is risk-free or is either even sustainable with such a political class. And also there is a responsibility on those who elected such a political class that drove them to the abyss, all right? But this is the order of the responsibilities, Tarek. The biggest responsibility is with the government. The second is with the banks and the central bank. The third is with the people. The distribution of losses in the government paper happens inversely. It is the people that are expected to fill the biggest gap, then the banks through the wiping of their capital, and then the government puts nothing. And this is where the Association of Banks paper came and said, no, the government needs to put in through this basically assets fund, and through the return of this fund, not privatization, through the return of this fund, should compensate for the losses. So the first...
The government plan also mentions an asset fund as well.
In the second version, and it's not very clear. It's not well elaborated.
Okay.
So first of all, the liquidation exercise is not a good one. I will give it a letter C, a grade C. And second, it's not just about the central bank. No, it is about the entire losses. But the biggest, for me, the biggest thing missing from that paper and from this plan, if we can call it a plan, is how to regain confidence in the economy and how to transform Lebanon back into a subject of going concern. Because if you're telling the people that you're going to be losing some of your savings and 50% of your income, I'm not sure how this is, how you're going to build the ownership you need for the people to move ahead with you in this yes. Basically journey. And because I would like to just end my opening remark with the reminder that Argentina collapsed finally again under an IMF program. Mm-hmm. And it went into re-election under an IMF program because there was no ownership from the people to the IMF program. And looking at the political and socio-economic scene in Lebanon, I don't think we are going to the IMF with a plan that we have built ownership around.
All right, so just to mention a couple of things, I want to get back to you to ask you later on how you see, because you mentioned that that Argentina failed, but Asia succeeded in going out of crisis. And I want to build on those two ideas in order to see what was the formula behind the failure in Argentina and the formula behind success in Asia. But I'll get back to you on this. Do you want to comment, please?
Yeah, yes, I have a comment. In fact, I agree with most of what was said by Mazen. I slightly disagree on the distribution of losses. Mm-hmm. Because I believe that I admit also that when we say distribution of losses, it's not necessarily an immediate distribution. So the gradual approach could be also a sound approach. We shouldn't maybe distribute all the losses at an instant time, like the government paper suggested. But this will come at a price. When we have a gradual approach, it depends on what is the portion that is left for the future. It simply means that the current status with the banks, so the non-accessibility of deposit in US dollars to the people will prevail. That's very simple. So just to put some figures, because the issue is not very, very complicated. The people, roughly, they have $120 or $130 billion deposit in the commercial. And the big problem is is not the government loss, is the BDL loss, because the commercial banks, they have 80 billion approximately, more or less, in US dollars. 79, I believe, in the central bank as deposit. So those 79 was the government admitted that the reserve of BDL are closer to 22 billion, which include obligatory reserves by bank. I don't want to go into a lot of details, but just as a big picture, the depositors, they have 120 billion at the commercial bank. The commercial bank have the majority of those deposits at BDL. So here is the big problem. And so if you adopt a gradual approach, that is also a sound approach. I'm not dogmatic about any idea to solve that. But if you don't solve the majority of that problem now, it's a mathematical equation that people cannot access their US dollars deposit as long as you didn't solve the problem. This is a first point. A second point, and also here I disagree with Mazen, is for me, government is the people. There is no such thing called as government. So I'm very shocked when we talk about distribution of loss, when we talk about the government as a closed and single entity. Who is the government? The government assets is our asset. It's the people asset. So we must decide as people, don't put those assets that belong to you and me and all of us in this panel, and they also belong to our children. There is an intergenerational also distribution. Do I want to jeopardize those assets? It could be yes. Well, I'm not dogmatic at all about it, because I believe you must treat it on a case by case. And I'm today running a study on government assets to try to quantify them, because people are saying nonsense, especially the bank paper. They quantify it like that at $4 billion. So the figure is very, very funny, and it's very shallow. And I'm very astonished that the whole banks of Lebanon didn't bother to do a proper quantification about Lebanese government assets.
So you are mentioning that they are much higher, right?
No, I think they are much lower, because the government assets, they don't have an sorry, I'm French educated, valeur so a proper value now, because now we are in a severe crisis, and they don't have a merchant value. So it's very funny that people talk about real estate, Tarek. So
exactly, that's what I want to say.
Yeah, so the whole real estate, real estate is offer and demand. So if I put 100 billion, the figure of 100 billion, it includes the mountains, it includes Baruch forest. If I put all that today, first of all, do I really want to put all that today in a fund that will be managed by the same people that brought the country in this crisis? This is the first question. Second question, what value does this real estate have in the current crisis? So you have some assets that have real value, as maybe Middle East, as the telecom companies. Those have real merchant value today. But today, I cannot believe that you could sell all the real estate of the government in a bankrupt country that has a severe crisis of liquidity and no attractiveness to any foreign investor. So those are, for me, mere slogans that do not really provide a serious path of distribution. if I want to go back to the pyramid, the government is the people. So this is for you and me. So we should think on the long term how to benefit from those assets, to restructure them, and how to make them produce income for you and me, and for the state and the welfare of people. Second, when we say that the government...
one argument on this, if I may. There's one small argument on this, which I'm hearing a lot from people who are with privatization. They are saying that there's a...
I am with privatization also.
Yes, but I mean, okay, but they are saying it's a fairy tale when you say that these assets are for the people, because the people are not the ones benefiting from. It's only a few in government who is actually benefiting, and you know how the political system is in Lebanon.
Yeah, in the current governance system, I agree, but nevertheless, even in the current governance system, the telecom company, for example, we know that they have severe governance problems, but at the end of the year, $1 million to the government, the Ministry of Finance, which for all of us, for the Lebanese people, theoretically. Just to end on that also, when we say that the government wanted to make the people bear all the losses, this is also, I believe, inaccurate, because the people that are talking about are the very high net worth. So they are the 2% that have big amounts in the banks, benefited from interest. And you and Mazen were talking about there is nothing as a free lunch. When you have 15% interest and 20, we had deals and swaps and engineerings that produce 25 and 40%, even up to 40% interest in 2 years. So you were putting your money in a very, very risky product, because if there wasn't any risk, it wouldn't produce such interest. So I believe it's fair also to up the interest that were tremendous and that were just computer entries, and to make the people that benefited from those interests repay the interest back. And that's where I agree with partially with the government plan. But I tell you again that it's a mix of solution, but within those boundaries, the people are the very high net worth, and the government assets.
Okay, I agree with the clawback on the interest, but first of all, do you think that there's a system that makes such a clawback equitable? Because if a majority of the interest-bearing accounts manage to get their deposits outside of Lebanon, then you would hit a percentage of them and then let go another percentage. So it's not equitable in the sense. This is one. Second of all, after you finish from such a procedure, okay, let's say you did a kind of a haircut, whether on interest or whether on the main deposits, which was discussed in the first round of the plan, you would come out with what kind of, let's say, depositor base in Lebanon? Would it be a depositor base which is ready to reinvest in the country after they took such a hit? Or would you end up with a depositor base which is looking forward to migrate from the country? And with that, I mean, you're hitting basically the people that can create wealth in the country and can create businesses in the country and jobs on the future.
Yes. So yeah, you are posing two questions. The first one is what would be the system? So the system can be an exceptional tax on earned interest, which will create a liability. So a fiscal liability on each one that benefited. And that is uncorrelated to the current deposits they have in bank. So it's just a liability that you pay to the government. This could work, and you have those systems as a tax on high net worth that are present in many European countries, namely. The second one is how not to impact the people that could create wealth and how to rebuild confidence. For me, that we are going to take is going to hit seriously the confidence. And for me today, the confidence, it's at
zero level.
We cannot be afraid on the loss of confidence when there is no confidence in the country. Lift up the informal capital control that we have here, you won't have $1 in the banks the next day. So I don't know if it will change anything. The whole confidence thing is a myth. I believe the confidence is destroyed, Tarek. So the myth of the confidence, it's over. No one has confidence in the Lebanese banking system anymore. So this should be a starting point, not how to keep that confidence and preserve it, because it doesn't exist. So if we take that as a starting point, I believe we need a full battery and set of measures to rebuild the confidence. It will not come in 6 months or 1 year. It will take a lot of time. It will begin with the political system, with the governance system, with the new economical model. So I don't have a ready like that, ready-made answer for that formula. It will take time, but I'm sure we can get there.
But this means that you are trying to say that capital controls will remain for a long period in Lebanon.
I believe they will remain for 5-6 years. And here the government plan is very funny, because the government plan
mentions 2 years.
That they will do a haircut and are doing everything that they want to do, and which is very ideologically also oriented. And by the way, the government plan was done by Lazar, is a financial advisor. They are not an economical advisor, which is very, very different. So they only have a financial view on the things. So it's very funny that they have capital controls for 2 years. I forecast it to last for 6 or 7 years minimum.
Yeah, I totally agree on this. I want to move to Dr. Soueid and ask him a question. I mean, part of the solution is to attract new investments in the country, okay? Whether we manage to build confidence or not, this is the bigger question. But what are you doing as IDAL to actually attract such new money to the country?
Well, I mean, attracting new money to the country now is a very ambitious thing, because nobody will put in money in a country without being answered first about the repatriation of capital. All right. I mean, this is the first important thing. So I think a capital control law that clarifies and that officially grandfathers basically the existing.
This is coming soon, apparently.
Let's hope so. But I want before I get into what we are doing at IDAL, and we're actually doing quite a bit despite all the negative factors that have been hitting us since we were appointed on October 10, me and my colleagues at the board. 2 things that I want to go back to just to close that discussion. First, what Albert said, and I agree with him, that the wealth of state is the wealth of its citizens. Of course, no question about it, you know. But I'm a reader of economic thoughts, the history of economic thoughts, and I thought the wealth of nation was clearly defined by Adam Smith in his masterpiece, The Wealth of Nation, in the 18th century, when he said the wealth of a nation is not the level of gold that it has in its vaults, or the amount of land that it owns, basically the title of. The wealth of nation is through the quality of goods and services that it provides to its people. Okay, so in this sense, and this is my problem with the current framework that the discussion is taking place in Lebanon, is that even when we are approaching the topic of privatization of the telecom, for example, or of the electricity, we are approaching it in the framework of distribution of losses, rather than in the framework that this is the best thing that can happen for the sector itself. I always give the example. I lived in the States for 15 years. All right, the States. This is the peak of capitalism. Capitalism at its best. All right, everything is owned by the private sector. Okay, the electricity is owned by the private sector. The telecom is owned by the private
infrastructure,
sector.
bridges, roads.
I used to pay lower fees on my telecom and my electricity bills than what I pay here in Lebanon when these things are owned by the states. It's not a matter of ownership. It's about how is it being run. Okay, and let me tell you more than that. I am against public-private partnership. I think public-private partnership is for those who are not bold enough to say that we need to go for full privatization. But which privatization? A privatization with regulation. This is the success of the United States or of some European countries in the provision of public goods. You know, the production and distribution is with the private sector. The regulation and part of the pricing is with the public sector. And the regulation is with people that are being appointed not by sectarian consideration or not by religious factor or not by who they know, but purely by their merit. Now, if you tell me that this is going to happen soon in Lebanon, then I tell you, yes, 2030 is going to be very good. You know, if we start seeing appointments, public sector appointments based on merit, based on relevant experience, rather than connections or who's friends with who or who knew whom, or you know, the veto of this sect or the support of that religion. When we start seeing independent regulatory authorities being established, okay, when I see the government going immediately into this path and going and fixing the real problems, the structural problems of the economy, rather than busying itself on who is to be blamed and who bears the loss, which is an important question, as Albert now, but we said, but we don't have to solve it now. You know, now we should be busying ourselves on two big issues. First, how to regain confidence and reboost the economy under very difficult circumstances. And here I would like to go, because you told me what was the winning formula for Asia,
yes,
and what was the mistake in the winning formula in Asia was that the Asian countries used the crisis as an opportunity, Tarek, to reform their economies. They went immediately deep into structural reforms. They liberalized their economies because it was there more of a capitalist dirigism. يعني it was more like how do you call it, اقتصاد موجه. So for example, the government told the Shaibuls in South Korea, the big conglomerate, on which sectors to focus. You know, they used this crisis to break that link between government and big business, and to really liberalize the economy. In Thailand, they liberalized, they broke monopolies, you know. They made major leaps in infrastructure development. They built airports in villages. They created a much more open, basically, domestic markets. This is how you transform a crisis into an opportunity. You see what were the problems with your private sector, what are your structural problems, and you go and you tackle them immediately. You don't need wait for the IMF to tell you what to do. Actually, Malaysia, which was the first Asian country to get out of crisis, did not do it with an IMF program. They actually did everything opposite what the IMF told them. And whatever was successful in Korea or in Thailand was done not because of the IMF, but because of the political class that realized that they need finally to do what needs to be done. The IMF does not have a magic wand, Tarek. It does not have a magic formula. The IMF, they are a lender. Let's not forget that. They come and tell you, I'm going to lend you, and I'm going to lend you under my term because you're coming to me because nobody else is willing to lend you. And I just want to make sure that you're going to repay me. So just go and do these fiscal and monetary measures, not reform, measures, to make sure that I'm being paid back. Okay? This will not in itself reboot your growth. Actually, it will hurt your growth. Okay? If it's not coupled by bold structural reforms, by a serious liberalization of the economy, by serious break of the monopoly, and of reforms that make your economy more productive and more competitive, then any distribution of losses, even if it's a fair one, and any fiscal reform and monetary reform that you do will not get you back to growth. And this is exactly what happened in Argentina because of the historic divide between the Peronist and not the Peronist and the blame. I mean, they are busy for the last 19 years doing the blame game and going in and out of IMF programs because they don't have enough popular ownership for this program. And look what they are now, okay? And I sadly say that, people, and this is coming from an IMF economist, someone who learned his macroeconomic framework analysis at the IMF, working at the IMF for 12 years. I tell you, the IMF is not your magical formula. The IMF will give you part only of the story. It will not give you the rest of the story. And nobody is talking about the rest of the story in Lebanon. That's what we are trying to do at IDAL, trying to work very closely with the private sector, trying to work very closely with the agriculture, with the industry, not because just we want to reboot growth and shift back the economy towards the productive sector. Because if we don't do this, Tarek, we will be hungry in 1 year. Exactly. We will be hungry in 1 year. If we don't move any today discussion at the level of decision makers that does not immediately focus on how to maximize output out of the allowed resources that we have, is a discussion that is not urgent to the current circumstances in the
I'm not
country.
sure there's political willingness to actually to actually do this framework that you described today. Because if you talk to political parties in closed rooms, they all agree that state assets might need to be privatized. When you go outside in the public, the position is completely different. Okay, and this has been kind of, you can see it in the economic plan that is put forward as well. It's the same thing. It's happening all over again. So we're going to go back to square one, and this is the selling point of the government. Keep the assets for the people.
But a government in times of crisis should not lead by public opinion. Actually, I believe that any government and any under circumstances should not lead by public opinion. All right, the people elect the government in one way or another. I don't know, but in the end, it's the government that governs and basically is held accountable. All right, I am with privatization because that's the best thing that can happen. But for the people to believe this government that that privatization will be done properly, let them go and start appointing independent people in the regulatory authorities.
Mm-hmm.
People, the country is very small, Tarek. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody knows everybody. If you come up with appointments that immediately portrays confidence, you can then do whatever you want. The people are behind. The people want you to save them, But if the people see the government now bickering over assignments here and there, and the discourse is still about who knows whom and who is connected to whom, and who's this guy's religion, and what's of course the people are going to be against privatization, because they're going to say that these are not the people that I entrust with selling my assets and the assets of my kids, and this is where I say that rather than talking about what they need to be doing, and rather than just now holding everything until the IMF comes and signs, let them start taking decisions. Let them start making appointments. Let them start showing the people a different approach to governing, which I have not seen yet, honestly. Although I do want to see it. We all want to believe. We all want to hope. We all want to get out of this mess. But if you ask me my personal opinion, do I see until now what has been done at the level of my ambitions or at the level of the crisis?
We're still far away. So Albert, I want to get back to you and ask you to build on this point exactly. Where are the low-hanging fruits in Lebanon now? Where can we start with reforms?
No, just also to comment, I'll address that. I'm fully in line with Mazen's comment on privatization, and I followed also the issue closely before the crisis in my professional life. And also, I worked in many countries on privatization, so I have some lessons learned. Privatization in Lebanon with the current political class and in the current, I believe, is the most dangerous thing that can be done. Because the political class in Lebanon is far from being stupid. And they started envisaging privatization 2 years ago when they felt that the public system, who is providing subsidies to their people, because today the Lebanese government is merely a central body where you put in the money, and those politicians act as brokers between citizens or so-called citizens. We don't have citizens in Lebanon, and the central rent. There is a rent in the central vault. So when those politicians began to see that the system is collapsing, because in early 2019, they began to sense that this cannot continue anymore because the public debt is unsustainable and so on, the politician became very fond of privatization suddenly. So what the scheme was to privatize corruption. So when you have the public space that is emptied of its resources, what you do is that you sell companies to your proxies and to your affiliate and to your religious sect member and to party members, and you privatize the whole corruption scheme. So privatization, I'm definitely in favor of privatization, not to the extent of the US model in my eyes, proved its limits, especially in the healthcare sector. So I would be a bit more balanced, but definitely telecom must be privatized, public transportation, water, ports, airports, the major infrastructure, utilities. So the Lebanese people, they don't know, I'm astonished by that, because we have a culture of public good. They don't know, for example, that Lebanon is one of the few countries in the world, I believe it's the only country in the world, that produces 100% of its electricity. The production of electricity is always a private sector matter, always. The transportation of electricity is a public sector domain, usually. Telecom, I can say very, with a lot of insurance, because it's my primary domain, that Lebanon is the only country in the world, that has nationalized all the telecom operators. So Jero, MIC1, MIC2. Even North Korea has privatized its mobile telecom operation, and it was bought by a gentleman called Naguib Sawiris, who is an Egyptian telecom tycoon. So this is totally abnormal. And we have a government today whose one of his achievements in the listing is to take back the operation of telecom. So this is completely against the best practices. This being said, to have a good privatization, I believe we need 2 or 3 years to put things on track. So it's not a few months, because you need, as Mazen said, you need regulatory authority that are truly independent and that have power, so that are empowered. Second, you need a vision for each sector that is adopted. The value of the assets are very much correlated to the vision. For example, I'll give just an example. In telecom, if you have today 2 telecom operators, their value is something, and if you would say that the government will grant 2 or 3 other licenses for telecom, the value will be different. So you need to align on a strategy, on a governance scheme, and on independence, and to have the right people to manage that. Within the right sectarian system, I believe this is practically impossible, because it's against the nature of the sectarian system we have. So I don't know how it is possible. That's why I'm very concerned when we talk about privatization as an immediate solution linked to the distribution of loss. No, it's not. Privatization is a solution for growth. It's a solution to put the country on the... It's not a solution to cover losses that were accumulated decades ago. Where are the low-hanging fruits? I believe it will take a lot of time, Tarek. I'm an optimistic guy by nature, but I believe it will take a lot of time, as all our vitals or the vital sectors are nearly destroyed, and we end up in producing nothing. So I believe we import 86% of what we eat in Lebanon. So it's really a catastrophic situation. So the low-hanging fruit, I don't believe we have low-hanging fruit. We have efforts to do. I would start by sectors of excellence that were rightly mapped by McKinsey. I believe we have a lot to do in agribusiness, in everything related to some specific industries that are high value creation and that rely on talent and university graduate as design, everything related to engineering, everything related to software. We shouldn't neglect the agribusiness is very important. So, and we have a great potential of export. I believe Lebanon has one of the vastest cultivable domain in the Middle East in terms of lands. So we can build on that, but we need the infrastructure. And our problem today is that we don't have financing to ramp up our infrastructure. And here, I agree with Mazen on PPP. It's quite complex, but I believe that we need some PPPs today, or fully privatization of greenfield infrastructure. So infrastructure that don't exist today, to be able to ramp up the infrastructures and to do something out of this country. I had a very telling experience, Tarek, by working with the government on the fiber project. On the telecom, and it's crazy what a mess the government is, because everything
was partly privatized, no?
No, the works were privatized, but no, in fact, the owner is still MOT.
Still
Yeah, in fact, here is the big confusion. Is it Ojero or MOT? And what is Ojero? Ojero is Hay'a. What is a Hay'a? So it's not a it's not corporatized. So we need to corporatize Ojero to create everything is sectarian. It's about when you dig into the what's happening, you understand. No Muslim, Masih, Shia, it's in everything. It's like that. So I did a prioritization model to install the fiber, by taking 18 criteria that are, I didn't take religion, unfortunately, as a criteria to prioritize, you know, the villages and where we should put fiber first. And in fact, the first criteria that was asked is religion and political affiliation. So I believe we cannot continue in this system. The system it will kill us. So we must have another system, or else we are doomed.
Excellent. I want to ask something which is always on my mind. I remember a friend of mine who used to, he's an American citizen, and he came to work in the Middle East with one of the big consultants. And a project he was doing was actually building up the business indicators for Saudi Arabia. So if Saudi Arabia wanted to go up on the scale of ease of doing business, they got one of the leading consultants to do it for them. And here in Lebanon, if you look at the indicators, you see that we are lagging behind on mostly every other indicator that is to do with getting investors on board. So Mazen, I want to ask you, why is the government not working on such a thing? Why are we not tackling this piece by piece, basically?
Look, it's unbelievable. When I was working with the former Prime Minister Signora as his economic advisor in 2008 in the second government that he formed, we put basically one of our objective was to improve this ease of doing indicator, which is published by the IFC. And at that point, I think Lebanon, if I remember, was in the 120 something range. Okay. Exactly. So over the last 12 years, it deteriorated rather than it improved. Because because it's not just about the government. You have the government, you have syndicates that are also major hurdles. Some of them, I'm not gonna say more. You have also laws that are totally outdated in Parliament. This should be a total orchestra, Tarek, a total orchestra that needs to be functioning in tune and in total in sync, basically, in order to get Lebanon out of its very poor basically ranking in the ease of doing business. But again, I don't think this will be now the important challenge.
Someone is asking you, who is the conductor for this orchestra?
Well, you're still missing them, I think. But I want to go back to your question, Tarek, about the role of IDAL, because I really need to highlight a couple of things. Because really, in the midst of all this, what we are trying to do is that we are trying to transform a crisis into an opportunity at IDAL. How? You know, in my opinion, there are three major problems with the Lebanese private sector. Okay. First, it is a highly leveraged sector. Okay. There is the very high level of debt to equity. Equity is low and debt is high. Second, it is still in a lot of ways a family-oriented sector. Businesses are still family-run. And three, it is very domestic-oriented rather than export-oriented. Okay, I think this crisis is an opportunity to reform the Lebanese private sector. Okay, and I'm trying to put IDAL at the center of this transformation. All right, how? When I was first appointed, as I said, in October 10, and by October 25, it was obvious that, you know, the country has gone in a totally different direction. I started thinking, you know, I'm not going to be able to bring any dollar from abroad. Let's be real. It's a long time for people to regain confidence in Lebanon. However, I have 120 billion of deposits in the banks, okay, for expatriates, for Gulf investors, for regular people, that they are no longer comfortable having it in the bank. And lots of them are gone into real estate, which is fine. But real estate is not going to get you your money back very quickly, okay? True. Meanwhile,
to take a hit at some point.
From the other side, you have, and it's not that productive. From the other side, you have industries, you have ICT sector companies, you have major jewels of the tourism sectors, okay, that are very highly leveraged and that today they are in a serious liquidity problem. So just before this liquidity turns into an insolvency problem, because that's also a very fine line between a liquidity and a solvency problem. Why don't we convince these industrialists, these business owners, these entrepreneurs, okay, to open their equity for people who have their money at the banks that want to get out of the bank and into the equity of a company, while basically swapping the debt of the bank into the equity. So you have, so I am a company, okay. I have $5 million of debt, okay, and because of this $5 million of debt, I'm almost making no money. Okay, and I cannot focus on growing the business. I cannot focus on making it more competitive, on investing in technologies, and therefore I cannot be export driven. And there is someone with $5 million deposit that happens to understand this business because he's an expat who runs this very similar business in Saudi Arabia or in the UAE, or he runs a business that is basically close to it. This is a golden opportunity. Exactly. The 5 million, they go into basically paying off the debt, and they go immediately into the equity of the business, you know. So immediately you are going to have three things happening. First of all, the company will be significantly deleveraged, okay, and the person that is coming into it is coming into immediately at better valuation, because the money he's making, he's paying, are not going into the pocket of the owner. They're going into the bank, reducing the debt of the company. This person will require better governance of the business. He will no longer accept that the entire board will be the family of the original owner and his son and his cousins, like a lot of the cases here. And third, because this guy's objective to invest in this company is to get his money back abroad, okay, he will be helping this business, tapping new markets, and basically doing some, helping them with the export, especially if it's a businessman, or if it's an industrialist himself, or if he understands this business. And this is why we are launching very soon at IDAL. We started the operation of what we're calling the business matchmaking platform. So we toured all the industry. We did basically awareness, and we basically sold this product. We have already lots of companies applying for exactly this program to sell part of their equities for debt reduction. We're doing the legal due diligence. We are doing all the financial analysis. We're going to provide a high profile, basically, presentation. And from the other side, we have lots of investors that I met personally when I went to Saudi Arabia, to UAE, to Jordan, when I was first appointed to IDAL before the Corona thing, because I realized that our strong asset is still the expats, especially the expats with money stuck here. Of course, their first reaction is that they're very angry, but after that, they will need to engage into a way to make use out of this.
This is something very important, as you say, and I want to put my Capital Markets Authority hat here and tell you, as you probably know, that we are also building an electronic trading platform which allows SMEs in Lebanon and startups and even established companies to issue shares, to issue corporate bonds, and allow for investors to build the capital base of the company and grow it further. So this comes in line.
I think we should collaborate on this style. We already have a very big portfolio of companies, and we have lots of investors that are interested. And in the end, like you guys, we are the state. We are not here to make money. We are not here. We are here to facilitate, to create the market. This is how I see the role of state, as a catalyst, as a market creator. This is a public good that we are providing. And hopefully we will help through this into the reformation of our private sector. We will be doing something for the future. And we will be, because I know this is one of the questions that you were planning to ask, Tarek, about the expats, how we can engage again our expats, you know, how we can capitalize on them. This will be hopefully correcting the historical mistake, I think, which is using expatriate money to basically just feed, as Albert said in the beginning, the monster of this economic system based on rent seeking and interest paying, easy money basically, rather than going into the productive sectors and putting our young men and women into work and into basically excelling at what they do best.
So I think Albert has something to say about this, because every time we sit together, I know that Albert is also working on a couple of initiatives which are similar. Right, Albert?
On which angle, please, precisely?
On restructuring of companies and allowing for...
Yes, I'm working with many companies on restructuring front. So yes, I believe we have many plagues also in Lebanon. Because the governance of the country is reflected in governance of the companies. So family businesses is an excellent thing. I love families, and we all love families. But family businesses in the Lebanese sense, I believe, are a severe handicap towards growing the economy and growing those companies. And now it's very interesting times, because most of the SMEs, like the big scale SMEs or large corporation, because we have also few corporations in Lebanon, are today passing to from the founder, because they were majority. It's a generalization, but that is true for most of the time. They were founded in the 40s to the 60s. And they are now increasingly passing to the second generation. Some are older and they are passing to the third generation. So I believe that here we also have a big opportunity because those companies are struggling, and the companies in Lebanon, due to the system, they lived a glorious phase where they were protected more or less. In Lebanon, you are more or less in tariff that block the to market. So not a very competitive market in all the fields. And those people were surviving, making 5, 6, 7% profit at the end of the year, and having lunches at the Cocteau or the Balthus on a daily each day. So what basis? What happened is that I see a lot of lack of innovation, lack of governance, lack of ambition, because the Lebanese system, unfortunately, it makes you lazy because of the lack of competitiveness. Circle of monopolistic people, you get very lazy. That's why we cannot export. That's one of the philosophical reasons, because we never feel the need, and we never feel the need to invest. Why do you invest in a company? This is a question that was haunting me the last few years. If you have 15% in the bank, so there is absolutely no incentive to invest in anything. So I believe here, I want to rebuckle with what I said in the start. The crisis is a big opportunity. And in my domain of business, it's much more often those 3 months that it used to ring before. Because I have the demand side, I have people that are running big companies that used to make this 5% and have very fancy lunches on a daily basis, that now with the currency crisis, with all what's happening, their plus 5% resulted in a -20 or -25. So those people need to learn to become competitive, and they need to innovate, they need to fight, they need to export, they need their product. That's one of the major problems of Lebanese agriculture, is that we are not certified. I'm working now for one of the major plants of FNB in the country. They import all their raw material from abroad, despite the fact that we have the same production in Lebanon. Why they do it? Because the products imported from abroad are certified, and they are standardized, and they are industry scale. In Lebanon, you have a big fluctuation on the quality, on the productivity of those raw agricultural products. So I believe today those sectors, you will either transform or you will die. There is no third way. So I believe all those businesses, they will strive to transform. Now, the willingness is there. The Lebanese people are very, very resilient, very smart, very open to the world, very know how to import best practice. And we are lazy because of the system. But when we feel the heat, I'm sure that Lebanese can adapt and transform. The real question now is, how do we finance that transformation now that the banks are dead? And this is not new. It's been 2 or 3 years that the banks are not extending any serious financing to the business. So it's here that organisms like IDAL are really, I believe, critical to the transformation of the country. And the whole question of accessing funds can be solved partially by the dollars that are stuck in banks. And today, the bank is as near as throwing your dollars in a chimney. So I believe people will do anything to take out their dollars from the banks. So it's quite interesting times, and that's why I'm a bit optimistic, or cautiously optimistic about the economy, because I believe those companies will transform. They will transform, and I'm running now 2 big restructuring projects. And the phone is keeping ringing, but I don't have the capacity to take more. And all the consultants here in Beirut, so I'm not the only one. So everyone is working a lot to help those companies transform. So hopefully we can make it.
And this is exactly the opportunity that we can have moving forward, I think. Yes, our economy needs a full transformation, and there's a heavy price to pay. But I mean, I want to ask Dr. Soueid, do you have any positive note that we can end with? And then I'll give you the floor also, Albert, to you before we end.
Look, I mean, we have to be positive in the end. You know, I mean, when I talk about my kind of, I wouldn't say pessimistic, realistic views, that there is no really hope at the end of the tunnel without a reform of our political system first, and the really going back to ownership and accountabilities of policies. And when people ask me, do you expect this to happen quickly, or when do you expect this to happen? I say, not maybe in my in the next few years. They say, so what's your backup plan? Where are you immigrating to? Where are you leaving? And I say, I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying here. You know, the country is not a 5-star hotel. When the level of service goes down to 1 star or to 2 stars, you pack your luggage and you leave it. You know, just like your parents when they get old in age, and you have to take care of them and take them more often to the hospital and sit down with them when they're doing their tests. You don't go and change them for younger, healthier parents. You know, the positiveness is that this is our country. We will fight for it, because in the end, we want it to belong to us, to our kids, and we want them to inherit a better country than the one we inherited from our parents. And this is the positiveness, you know, the willingness of the Lebanese, the maturity of the Lebanese that I've seen in the revolution, in the October 17 revolution, that I will call revolution. Some people don't like to call it revolution. When you see a veiled woman on the camera saying that the problem of Lebanon is the sectarian system, okay, that ripped us apart. When you see a man wearing a cross and saying, we don't want religion anymore. We want a secular state. This is hope. This is positiveness. You know, it will take all of us to fight for it. It will not be easy, but nations don't earn their place in history